that all the planets are changing the same way as the Earth is changing. The Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. They are a universal phenomenon throughout the solar system. When we start to look behind the veil, the hidden reality that we have, and we start seeing a deeper truth of ourselves and a deeper truth of what it means to be human on this planet, we come into contact with a body of information that has been kept secret for thousands and thousands of years. And the reason why is that with this information comes the potential for what is called apotheosis. Apotheosis means human becomes God. The people who are in power believe themselves to be gods. They have inherited an ancient tradition which encourages the practice of developing your own spiritual and intuitive faculty to a much, much greater level than most people ever do. And they have a variety of practices, very distinct practices, which are engineered to awaken your psychic center. I show you visual evidence of the pineal gland symbolism in the pine cone. And I show you that symbolism all over the world, in all different traditions, Babylonian traditions, even in the Vatican. The largest statue in the square, which is called the Court of the Pine Cone. It's huge. It dwarfs the size of a human being. Why would you put a pine cone on a big statue? Why did Jesus say in the Bible, "If thine eye be single, then thy body will be full of light"? If your eye is single, what does he mean by that? Does that mean that if somebody pokes your eye out that you're going to suddenly start glowing? No. When you see the greater reality that I am going to share with you in this presentation, you come to an understanding that your DNA did not randomly evolve on this planet. Your DNA is an energy pattern that exists throughout the entire cosmos. And that energy pattern is a wave. The ancients built the Great Pyramid as a focalizing device to harness that energy. I am proposing that the energy that makes your DNA takes natural materials that are all around, just molecules and atoms in space. It takes those atoms and molecules and it intelligently arranges them together to form the DNA molecule. Now, if that is true, then it means that everyone here in this room is created by an intelligent energy field. The center of the Milky Way galaxy is also a torsion field generator. Spherical torsion waves slowly expand away from the center, passing through stars and planets as they go along. As the solar system is impacted by these torsion fields, it charges up with energy, causing massive effects on the star and its planets, influencing them to become brighter, hotter, and more magnetic. These waves also have a stimulating and programming effect on the DNA molecule, ultimately rewriting the code of every life form on the planet. You now have just found the zone in which science and religion come together, in which you no longer have to take on arbitrary promises about there being a hereafter. Now you have proof that who you are and what makes you who you are came from something that is not physical, something that is vastly more intelligent and complex than we had ever imagined, and something that has been known about for quite a long time. There is no difference between biological life and inanimate matter except for the sophistication with which the energy that makes that matter is flowing. The rocks that make the pyramid are made of the same stuff that spirals in to make your DNA. It's just that the DNA is a much more intelligently spiraled version of that same energy, whereas the rock doesn't have as much structure. But the pyramid uses calcium carbonate, CaCO3. The basic matrix of limestone is quartz. And quartz is a crystal, so it has crystalline properties, which means as you get more and more crystallized in terms of a mineral, you're getting closer and closer to what becomes biological life than you had before. So a crystal is a very important conduit between the world of life as we know it and the world of the inanimate matter as we know it. That's an important point. Because what you have in the Great Pyramid is a device that harnesses this energy by a very simple process. You are going to see evidence in this presentation that demonstrates conclusively that the energy itself that makes physical matter has a fluid-like quality. It behaves as if it were a fluid. And with that fluid-like quality comes all of the basic behaviors that you get with fluids in movement, which would include a funnel. It's a very simple concept. If you have water that's pouring into a funnel, where's the fastest speed in the funnel going to be? Right at the bottom, right? That's where it's spinning the fastest. And the funnel is obviously going to take all that water and it's going to create a current through the funnel. So if every single calcium carbonate crystal inside the Great Pyramid is taking in this fluid-like energy and it's flowing through, now again, the flow is not happening in 3 dimensions of space. It's happening in 3 other dimensions, which is the time field. Okay, that's where things start to get complicated. If you want to find your higher dimensions, you look in time. Einstein assumed time was 1-dimensional. It's not. Time is 3-dimensional. That means you can go forwards, backwards, and sideways in time. And that gives us a really wonderful benefit, because that means we can see stuff that hasn't happened yet. We can see potential realities. One of the weirdest aspects of esoteric teaching is the concept that when you see a future event, you are seeing a probable future event. You are not seeing the future. There is a very important difference, because anything that you think might be happening in the future doesn't need to happen if you don't want it to happen. Because in fact, in ancient Greece, the prophets were not men, they were women. Every woman who was a prophet was named Sibyl. And the most famous Sibyl was the Sibyl of Cumae, spelled C-U-M-A-E. And she had a prophecy that came true regarding the coming of Jesus. In the Greek and in the Roman Empire, the women with the gift of prophecy were known as Sibyls, but none were as well known as the Sibyl of Cumae. She dwelled in a cave with multiple entrances and wrote her prophecies down on oak leaves. In the event that no one came to pick them up, they simply blew away. The Sibylline prophecy is widely respected as one of the harbingers of Jesus' arrival, but that was one of many things. The prophecy book was so accurate that in the Roman government, that was considered the highest treasure they had. There was nothing in the Roman government that was taken on with greater seriousness than the Sibylline prophecy scripture. The Sibylline mystery texts are one of many texts that describe a utopian world that is coming into being. In fact, every ancient mystical and spiritual tradition speaks of a golden age that is coming. And they don't speak about it in a bland, sophomoric fashion. They speak about it in an exciting, invigorating, eye-opening way because of the extent to which they say things will be changed. And you're going to see those prophecies at the end of this talk. This time that we're in is a time of change, and it's a time in which we all get to experience that change together. We're all in this together, and each one of you are one of those liberators. If you're watching this video on the internet, or if you're in this room with me right now actually seeing this live, you are one of those people who has been charged with a responsibility to share what you know with the people. And yes, just like has happened to me, somebody is going to call you the Antichrist. It happened to you, apparently. is looking at the solar system and seeing that all the planets are changing the same way as the Earth is changing. The Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. They are a universal phenomenon throughout the solar system. That's called interplanetary climate change. That's one of the things we're going to be talking about. You're also going to see evidence very clear in the fossil record showing that in even intervals of 26 million years, every form of life on Earth spontaneously changes and upgrades from one type of creature to another. The DNA code itself gets rewritten, and I'm going to show you the evidence of how that happens. More recently, another cycle was discovered that's 62 million years in length. This cycle was discovered by Dr. Robert Rode, goes all the way back to the first single-celled organisms in the fossil record, 542 million years ago. 62 million year cycle. Now, what does this mean? What I believe this means is that the center of the galaxy is releasing waves of energy. And the way that you visualize this is think about dropping a rock into a stream or a still pond. You drop that rock into the pond, the surface makes a ripple. It's a circle, and it goes out. These are ripples of energy that slowly travel from the center of the galaxy, and they're structured like layers of an onion. And they're evenly spaced because it's all vibration. It's all harmonics. So as these evenly spaced walls shoot through the solar system, they reprogram the DNA on Earth. And all of the creatures on Earth are spontaneously transformed, as you see in the fossil record here. There's no evidence in many of these cases of cataclysms. There's just suddenly one species and then another one. And there's no transition. You have shellfish, like a clam, and then the skeleton's on the outside and the body's on the inside, and then what happened? That flesh is on the outside, skeleton's on the inside. There's no halfway creature where the flesh is halfway in and halfway out. You go from shellfish to bony fish, bang, just like that. It was spontaneously changed. And there are many, many of these dropped things in the fossil record where you can't see the difference. What we really need to do is look back to the past, as we've already started, and get a sense of what was the technology of Atlantis, because I want to present to you the possibility that a technology doesn't necessarily involve machines with electrical circuits and gears and moving parts. A pyramid can be a technology. It can be a technology that operates as a machine just by sitting there, and as I said earlier, acting as a funnel for this fluid-like energy that makes all of matter as we know it. Obviously, you have the pyramid here. This is the second pyramid next to the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx in front. These are the casing stones, what's left of them on the top, which originally, as I said, were mirror-polished, white limestone. We now have an Atlantis-type city that was found under the ocean on the western tip of Cuba. And this was covered in the media briefly, but then the story was squelched. This is the actual side-scan sonar photographs of what was originally discovered. This was two scientists, Paulina Zalitsky and Paul Weinzweig, who had been given a charter by the Cuban government to conduct side-scan sonar readings of the seafloor around Cuba, hoping to find sunken Spanish galleons with gold on them and treasure. And they promised that they would give the Cuban government a share of the profit. So that seems like a pretty good deal. You just give somebody permission to do these readings, and then lo and behold, if they find something, you get to make money. Now, the problem was that what they found was not treasure. It was much more valuable than just gold coins. It was actually pyramids and sphinxes and roads and buildings. Now, a three-dimensional reconstruction of what you see from the top down here has been built. So what you see here is the ruined platforms of giant buildings that are now a half a mile under the ocean. And we know, based on geology, that these structures could not have been above sea level any time earlier than 10,000 years ago. They're at least 10,000 years old, minimum. We know this is true. This should be the smoking gun of Atlantis. There was a contract made with National Geographic. This was all supposed to be released in the summer of 2003, but it got squelched. It never came out in the open, unfortunately. Here's Paulina Zalitsky in front of inscriptions that she found in the caves in Cuba that are very, very similar to what she saw in the Atlantean ruins that she was looking at with a submersible submarine that has a little camera in it. She actually saw inscriptions just like this. Now, these are the descriptions of those energy fields in the solar system. Remember I was telling you the galaxy gives off these rippling waves of energy and they come through the solar system? Well, the Atlanteans knew about that and they were drawing it. And so what you see is planets here with their ripples on it, and then that's the sun. Or that could be the galaxy. We're not really sure. She also found these inscriptions in the caves of Cuba, which would have just been the highland mountains of Atlantis. And these are identical to inscriptions that were found on the stones underneath the water. Now, this is the closest that she's ever come to actually showing us one of the pyramids. This is from actual footage that was taken from her submarine. It's the only picture that has ever been released to the public showing one of her pyramids. You can look at it up close and get a glimpse of what actually is a blunted top. It does not go in a straight line. Well, there is another example of that, and that's the bent pyramid of Dashur in Egypt. And so what we're seeing is very, very similar structure. Now, this is an enormous, enormous pyramid under the ocean in Cuba. So, anybody that tells you that Atlantis is full of crap, I just gave you photographic proof that it exists. So that argument has been shot. We know for a fact that pyramid could not have been above sea level could not have been above sea level unless it was at least 10,000 years old. At least. Given that information, what the heck did they know, and why did they build these things everywhere they possibly could? Ancient sites do harness energy. We're going to see a variety of sites that do this. The first one we're going to talk about is menhirs, or standing stones. And I want you to just primarily look at them. There's not a whole lot to say except how beautiful they are. A person is only about this tall, so this gives you a sense of how huge some of these are. These stones are able to harness energy coming up out of the earth and ripple it out into the surrounding countryside in expanding circles. And that energy, as we're going to see, actually has positive benefits for people's health, has positive benefits for vitality. There's many, many things that these stones will do for you. And they harness an energy of consciousness, an energy that will actually help us to become more evolved, more intelligent, and more psychic. And it's just a phenomenal feat that they would actually be able to take these giant stones and get them to stand up like this in the first place. With the equipment that was supposedly available to them at the time, this is quite a stunning accomplishment. The next one we're going to talk about is barrows. Barrows are mounds, and they exist in America as well as in England. The ones that I'm showing you now are all going to be in England. It doesn't look like much except just a big round dome. But the interesting part is, and you can see how pyramidal that one is, the interesting thing is that many of them have entrances, and you can actually go through the entrance and go inside, and there's a big round room inside. And you meditate inside the room, and once again you get this big spiritual energy blast when you go in there. Now, they're not only single mounds, sometimes they become elongated mounds, and this is all related to tailoring the energy coming out of the earth. Henges are the ones that everybody is so familiar with and we love so dearly because of Stonehenge, but that's not the only one. This is a part of Avebury here, which is another henge. The sheep really like the energy the stones give off. Sometimes you get large stones that are just set up right but are not specifically tall and narrow like that. This is an example of a barrow and a henge. You have a henge in the front, and this is a barrow in the back with an entrance up here. Another example of a henge, another example. So you can see these don't just occur a couple times. They keep happening over and over again, and these are only the ones that are still standing. There's many others that have been buried. Now this is fascinating because this is the full outline of Avebury. Every single little dot in this entire serpent shape that you see here used to be a standing stone, and every single one of them still exists. They've dug them up from the ground. So this was an enormous serpent with a head and then the stomach that has eaten something. And this is Silbury Hill. So what you actually have here, if you notice the triangular relationship between these areas, is all these stones and the mound are all built to focus energy here and here primarily. It sends the energy into this area where a large gathering of people happen, and it acts as a consciousness-enhancing technology, which we now have lost access to in the West. And this, of course, is Stonehenge, the most famous group of these standing stones of all. Quite beautiful, tongue and groove lintels that stand on top of the menhirs. This is what it looked like when it was first built, and you can see that every single one of those stones was there, and they've just fallen apart over time. And then over time, these post holes were dug that allowed them to calculate eclipses and planetary cycles and all sorts of things. Now the next question is, are these ancient structures connected? And the science that will help us to understand this is ley lines. Sir Alfred Watkins was the modern pioneer to discover how ancient sites all come together on uniform blueprints. In 1920s, he found that ancient holy sites could line up in straight lines. He called them leys. The sites from extremely different ages, millennia apart, were all aligned together, including Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and the Christian era. So here he is with his camera, and he would actually take pictures of long distances and calculate how straight the lines were, and they were amazingly accurate. Now look at this. What you see in this diagram is a part of England, and every single one of these little, where you see a word, that's an ancient sacred site. And it can be anything from cathedrals to Stonehenge to all sorts of stuff built in all these different eras of time, but somehow every single one of them lands directly on that line. Now, why do you think they would do that? Doesn't it seem to suggest that they knew something? That there was some energy coming out of the earth that means that if you build a pyramid or one of these standing stones, that it's going to be a lot more powerful if you build it on that line than somewhere else. It's basically like this. If you want to eat food for dinner, you're not going to eat air, right? You're going to actually have a real meal. This is where the food is for the pyramid. So if you want your object to work, if you want your structure to work, you build it where the energy is, so it can harness the energy that you built it to make for you. The BBC published a very interesting article that gives us insights into the science of ley lines. The area again is Gloucestershire, and here's the line that we just saw before, and then you can also see there's another line there, which also has many, many ancient sites on it. Ley lines are one of the most enduring Earth mysteries, a network of prehistoric pathways crisscrossing the country believed to have mystical significance. They're alignments and patterns of powerful Earth energy, said to connect various sacred sites including churches, temples, stone circles, megaliths, holy wells, burial sites, and other locations of spiritual or magical importance. Major prehistoric structures of higher importance can frequently be found to occupy locations where two or more leys intersect with each other. Alleged ley lines are often identified by spiritualists dowsing with rods. These methods are questionable in their accuracy, so the alleged placement of ley lines should be treated with some skepticism. Well, thankfully, that might have been true if all you had was dowsing, but what we actually have is a worldwide map of all the ley lines and why they're there, because it's all based on geometry. We're going to get to that right now. Hyperdimensional grid effects. The first place that we go to understand how all these ley lines connect together around the world is we got to find where all the weirdest stuff happens on the planet. Ivan Sanderson did that by investigating a massive number of disappearances of ships, which is marine, and aircraft. These ships are marine vessels that are sailing through the ocean, and all of a sudden they're gone. And there could be somebody sailing behind them and they seem to vanish. They don't know where they went. There's no flotsam, there's no wreckage, there's nothing to show that these ships were there. They just disappear. Now sometimes wreckage has been found and the phenomenon has been attempted to be debunked by people finding certain examples of wreckage, but that does not mean that all of this stuff is disproven by any stretch. Sanderson discovered that all of these different disappearances of aircraft and boats all occur at 12 locations around the world. They can all cluster around those 12 locations. And even more interestingly, the 12 locations are equally distant from each other. I mean, if you're just zoning out and kind of getting hypnotized by me and not really paying attention, you're not going to get the importance of that. Not that I'm hypnotic at all. But equally distant from each other, what does that mean? That's like a guitar string. When you pluck a guitar string, all of the points in which the string is vibrating like this, in between 2 points, it doesn't really move, and that's called a node. The nodes are always equally distant. That's a product of vibration. So if you have a string vibrating and it creates 5 nodes, those nodes stay the same, and the string is going up and down around the node like this. So what we're seeing is that the Earth's energy has these 12 spots where it's pulsating in and out like this, but on those 12 spots it's not moving. And what you're seeing is a gateway between dimensions that forms at those spots, which are geometric in nature. If you connect the dots, it forms a geometry called an icosahedron, which is one of the basic so-called Platonic solids because it was invented by Plato, who also gives us the dubious distinction of inventing school. So if you want to blame somebody for why you had to go through all those years of school, you can blame Plato. One of the 12 spots is the Bermuda Triangle, as you see here. Here they are laid out along the Earth. You can see this is the Devil's Triangle here in Japan. This is Easter Island down here. You have another one off Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. You have another one down here around Africa. That's the groovy stuff that's happened with the Himalayas. All the stories of the masters of the Far East, the masters and teachings of the Far East, Baron Spalding. He's got all that stuff about ascended masters. You have weird stuff that's happening with sightings in Africa, dinosaur sightings here. This is another disappearance spot. Most of the rest of them, as you can see, are in the ocean. The only 2 that are on land are in Africa and here in the Himalayas. You had a question?
Isn't that where that one in the Pacific goes? Isn't that where the Great Garbage Patch is sitting on?
Yes, actually that's true. The Great Garbage Patch is right over here because this is an area in which all the ocean currents circulate called the doldrums. Because you don't want to sail through that, there's no wind there. But the reason why the garbage patch is formed there is because the water always circulates around these vortexes. These vortexes have a lot of energy around them. There's also the most number of electrical fish in the ocean in these areas, which is another interesting thing, like electric eels. Now, if you actually look at the whole Earth together, you get the icosahedron. That's the shape. That's how they all connect together. So this is a geometry. Now, the reason why this is important is that this geometry will form naturally if you vibrate liquid with a pure sound frequency. That's the big secret. A pure sound frequency, like one of the white keys in the piano, you play that frequency into the water, whatever the water is. In this case, it's the energy that behaves like water, but it's the same principle. But you can do it with regular water, and you get that geometry showing up in the water when you play these sound frequencies. So that's the basis of it. It's basically just geometry. It's a vibration. Geometry is vibration as a crystal. So these 3 Russian scientists, and everybody laughs when I say their names for whatever reason, Goncharov, Morozov, and Makarov. I don't know why that's funny, but okay, if y'all want to laugh, you can laugh. Found that over 4,000 sites fit on the global grid. And the global grid that they found, they started with Ivan Sanderson's basic 12 points, the icosahedron, and then they simply added in another geometry called a dodecahedron. And by mixing the 2 together, they found all the ley lines. They found a way in which everything that has ever been built that looks like it's built to harness this energy, including Chinese temples, pagodas, Stonehenge, dolmens, menhirs, all the stuff I was showing you, cathedrals, all around the world, Easter Island, the mound builders in America, you name it, they found 4,000 of these kinds of sites, and every single one of them was on this grid. So the whole world knew how to use this technology back then, and it's been lost. This is the most advanced version of the grid that we now have, called Becker-Hagen's, and this is where the black spots are the original 12 nodes of Ivan Sanderson's grid, and then you see how it's evolved with, you now have 2 icosahedras together, one that is out of phase with the other, and that's what creates these 120 different triangles that form the grid. It's called the Unified Vector Geometry 120 Polyhedron, or UVG 120. That's the long name for it, but the simple name is Becker-Hagen's grid, which is a lot easier to say.
Question.
Yeah?
Are there any here in the United States?
Oh yeah, if you look at the United States on the Becker-Huygens grid, what's the first big node that you see? It's right around Los Angeles and Baja California there. So this is why there's so many people in Los Angeles, why it's such a huge population center, because we like to be near these nodes. They feel good and they create a lot of energy. I'm very energized by living in LA. We're in this area right now. We're on this node right now where this talk is happening. The other big one, of course, is right off Florida. And look at this. The lines, again, are very important, and that line shoots straight up the east coast of the United States. So everybody on the East Coast, the whole East Coast megalopolis, is all feeding off of that line. And then when people get old and they get sick, what do? They want to move to Florida. Why do they want to move to Florida? Because they feel healthier. Why do they get healthier? Because they're on the node. And the node feeds your DNA. There's Hawaii, okay? And what we know is that Hawaii is right on one of the nodes, and the cancer rates in Hawaii are dramatically lower than anywhere else in the world. Dramatically lower. We also find out that in Washington, D.C., the cancer rates are much lower. So the people that decided where to put the capital of the United States made darn sure that they used this grid. Because what you have is a lot of these politicians, and they leave, like I think Richard Hoagland talks about Sam Donaldson as one example, that he left Washington, D.C. and died very soon afterwards. Because in D.C. they have a grid node that gives you a lot of energy that helps you heal. Now what you can also see here is grid effects in which the landmass is being sculpted by these geometric forces. These lines are not arbitrary. You can see these island chains that fit perfectly in a grand circle. You connect these nodes on the grid together. You see how they all fit together. Now the Germans discovered that there were some houses where the energy was really bad and people were getting sick and dying. 1920s in Germany with the Dowsers discovered that more people got cancer in these certain houses, and they revealed from their dowsing, which I believe is credible, that the houses had veins of water running underneath them. The neighboring houses did not have two rivers that crossed together under the house. So it's when these two rivers of water crossed together that you were getting these negative effects that actually diminished your health. And apparently the reason why is that when you have two rivers crossing over each other underground, that they draw energy, that it creates an energetic friction that scrambles the field and actually scrambles your field and creates cancer. So it's not always healthy. Sometimes it can be unhealthy. So can we prove the sites harnessed usable energy? Well, obviously somebody thought so, because every single daggone site that you can find out of 4,000 in the world, all were built on this grid. If the grid doesn't mean anything, then why did they do that? Obviously there's a reason. The grid can be shown to have shaped the continents for where they are now, and clearly there was a usable energy that they were harnessing in order to bother to build the pyramid in the first place. I mean, it's not exactly an easy thing to build these pyramids. These stones are weighing hundreds of tons. Some of them are bigger than 18-wheelers. They're much bigger than 18-wheelers. They're the size of small buildings, a single stone. We can't even lift them now. We don't have any crane in the world that's big enough to lift these stones. Why did they bother to do it? And if they're doing it, why would they do it on this specific spot on a grid? What's the point? The point is that they're using energy. Well, if they're using energy, then how can we prove that? I'm not just going to ask you to take my word for it. I want scientific proof that shows me what they're doing and how we can use that technology today to help the world. Is that not a good idea? I mean, that's a great idea. Because if we can use this technology today, then we might be able to solve some problems that we have on the Earth, including the energy crisis. And we may be able to find new ways to keep people healthy. Because, as you can see, the Krebs houses in Germany would actually make people very unhealthy, and other sites were very much associated with health. That's why they built the Dolmens and the Menhirs and the Barrows. These were meditation spots. So in Russia, they now have done research with pyramids that holds the key to explaining all this stuff in a way that we can make sense out of. What you're seeing here on the bottom is people, and this is a 144-foot tall pyramid built out of fiberglass and PVC pipe. PVC pipe on the inside, as you can see here, and then these are the sheets of fiberglass on an angle going up the inside. An amazing, amazing structure that has many, many interesting things that happen once you've built it, both inside and outside. This is not simply something that you get to look at and say, wow, it's a pyramid, it's cool. This is a working technology that they have studied scientifically. And by the way, this is not woo-woo science. These are the same people that were in the military-industrial complex of the Soviet Union who, after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1990-91 timeframe, still had the facilities, still had the communist government paying them a monthly salary, but didn't have anything to do because the military-industrial complex no longer existed as it once did. So they still have the labs, they still have a salary, and they can study whatever the heck they want. So because they had this whole background of research, they built pyramids. And they studied the science of pyramids, and they came up with some amazing research. So here are some smaller examples. You can see they were built in the countryside. This one obviously is a lot shorter. Now let's take a look at some of the things that they found. If you build one of these pyramids over an oil well, you get 25% more productivity out of the oil well. It's amazing. And you get 25% fewer contaminants in the oil. They found incredible healing results. First of all, if you take a poisonous substance and you store it inside the pyramid, the chemical makeup of the substance changes and it's no longer toxic to the body. The pyramid is harnessing the very energy of life, the energy that keeps things alive and keeps things healthy. They even found that cancer, you could give the same carcinogens to lab rats and then to rats in the pyramid, and the rats in the pyramid would get much, much fewer tumors, if any, than the rats in the lab. You give them exactly the same carcinogen, and the rats in the pyramid do fine. The same thing was true with typhoid fever, diabetes, all this kinds of stuff. In the pyramid, there was no problem. There was a 400% increase in the productivity of seeds that were stored in the pyramid. That's another amazing effect. All you got to do is take seeds and scatter them into the pyramid, and then leave them there for a while, and then start planting them. And the plants are 400% bigger than the same seeds that were not put in the pyramid, over and over again. So it's like the seed itself and the plant that grows from it has been supercharged by this energy in a very fascinating way. There was strong electrical activity generated at the top of the pyramid, meaning that you could actually put a battery pile, like a battery charger up there, which is just positive, negative in a big solution, and it starts generating electrical current, and you can power your house with it. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because what they also found was that earthquakes did not happen anymore as these big, nasty, catastrophic events. They only got small little quakes that didn't cause any trouble to the land. Now, if the ancients are building pyramids all over the world, and we know that Atlantis sank, then do you think that maybe they were trying to make sure that that didn't happen again? Or, an even more interesting idea is, what if the ancients knew that Atlantis was going to sink, and they were in a mad dash to try to stop it from happening by building pyramids around the world, and they didn't get the network finished in time? That's another possibility. We don't really know which one it is. There was also an enormous column of energy detectable around the pyramid in the atmosphere, hundreds of miles wide. And this column of energy would actually deflect severe weather. You would have a storm coming in, and there's this big circle that forms around the pyramid, this energetic circle. And the storm just goes right around the circle. It's incredible. So, what does this start telling us about the nature of weather? Think about that for a minute. What is weather? What is a severe weather activity? It's a torsion field, right? It's a consciousness thing. Earthquakes. Earthquakes, to some degree, are related to this torsion field, because if you have this pyramid which is regularizing that flow of energy, then you no longer get earthquakes anymore. The ancient teachings tell us that the earth is alive, and that bad weather and bad problems are the result of the earth being upset with us. That we create a disharmony. And the disharmony that we create is what creates the bad weather and the bad earthquakes and the volcanoes and all that stuff. And the pyramids were able to make all this stuff happen. The Russians took granite that looked like salt and pepper. It was white and black granite. And they put the granite inside the pyramid. And then after a while, they took the granite out and they built jail cells with it. And what they found was that the prisoners who stayed in the jail cells made out of this specific granite were much more well-behaved than the other prisoners. The prisons that were built, where the cells were built with this granite, those prisoners in those prisons they all got off of alcohol and drugs. They all started to get along with each other much more than the others. And the problem is that the translation was bad, and we thought that it was actually salt and pepper that they were feeding the prisoners. But it turns out that salt and pepper is actually granite. So that's a mistake. So this proves that there is a connection between the consciousness of humanity and the consciousness of the earth. Earth changes are not something that's happening randomly. We're also, oh my God, global warming, what are we going to do? Oh, we got to use solar power and stop driving cars and stuff. Well, obviously we should figure out how to get cars running on water, and I was talking to you about that technology. That already exists. We could desalinate the oceans very easily with some of these technologies. But global warming is an energetic phenomenon. And it's a phenomenon that, as I said, is occurring throughout the solar system. It proves there's a connection between earthquakes and consciousness. It proves that there's a connection between severe weather and consciousness. And it proves that our consciousness is directly affecting the Earth. So that's a very significant piece of information for us to have, because it gives us the power back. We're no longer out there expecting that these things cannot be dealt with, that there's really nothing we can do. We do have the control, we do have the power, and it comes from pursuing the truth within ourselves, and then that truth has a radiant quality that affects the whole planet. So all we have to do is work on ourselves, work on our own inner spiritual quest, find the love within ourselves, find the ability to love ourselves, which is primarily through forgiveness. If you have forgiveness, then you can deal with all of these terrible things in your life that you haven't been willing to accept. With forgiveness comes the stoppage of the wheel of karma. You don't have to keep going through cycle after cycle of suffering anymore, because now what you're doing is breaking the cycle. And so on a collective level, all these earth changes over here are happening because we haven't gotten to this forgiveness over here. The pyramid was the master design in which the open sarcophagus in the king's chamber, you're supposed to lie in it. You have an out-of-body experience where you then face your own shadow self, projected to you as this monster that you have to wrestle with in the astral plane. And if you successfully can forgive and accept that part of yourself that appears to be evil, then you get the healing. Now this is what's happening to us as a planet. What do you think that projection of the part of ourselves that looks evil is in the planet right now? The New World Order, the Illuminati, the government. If you are angry at the New World Order, if you are angry at the Illuminati, if you hate them, and if you're out there afraid of them, they're winning. Because negative entities feed on your fear. They actually harness your energy of fear. The fear that you feel sends energy to them. What I'm here to tell you is that there is nothing to be afraid of, because they are fulfilling their purpose of acting as the projection of our shadow. We're going through this planetary initiation of the open sarcophagus. The reason why it's open is that once we're through this, there is no more death. We have reached a state of immortality, much different than where we are now. That's what the prophecies say. When someone who is profane, if you will, using a Masonic term, goes into the pyramid, like Napoleon, he had a terrible night. He tried to stay in the sarcophagus overnight. He had horrible nightmares, and he ran screaming out of the pyramid. So you have to be ready for this. That's his actual sketch of his terrible night in the pyramid that he drew. Isaac Newton, of course, was just another guy, a scientist, and he happened to see an apple fall, and everybody saw apples falling out of trees all the time. The only difference is that Newton starts saying, hey, why did the apple fall out of the tree? Is there something that made the apple fall out of the tree? It's gravity. There's a force that pulled the apple out of the tree and made it hit the ground. It doesn't just happen. There's a reason for why it happens. So this is the new Newtonian revolution. And the question is, are we looking to see the apple falling? Are we looking at the obvious truth of pyramids, Stonehenge, standing stones, temples, churches, megalithic structures built all around the world, 4,000 of them, and every single one is built on this grid. That's the same thing as Newton seeing the apple fall. That's the same thing. The only difference is that we haven't yet identified that there's a force responsible for why they built these things in these places. This brings us back to the questions of God. What you're starting to see is a provable spiritual teaching, a scientifically valid exploration of a supreme being. That's where we're going. Religion doesn't need to be there except as a way to organize your understanding of a one infinite creator. You can go into this atheistic and look at it strictly scientifically and come to the conclusion that there must be some intelligence to the universe. And that's one of the problems, is that the word intelligent design has now been irrevocably intertwined with creationist biblical teaching. And that should not happen, because many people who are proponents of intelligent design are not buying into mainstream Christian theology. But what's happened is that either you're a scientist, which means you don't believe any of this stuff, or you're a religious nutcase. But there's a middle ground, and that's the thing, is the ancients knew this. And then you have groups like the Masonic Order, which have taken all these ancient traditions, like on the back of the dollar bill, and they make it secret, but they hide it right out in front of you. They're showing you the pyramid, right? They're showing you the eye going down. Obviously, they think that's really important because it's one. They have the word one on the dollar everywhere, one God, right? It's the one God. George Washington's eye is directly in the middle of the dollar on the front. If you go and take a look, you'll see that. Because there's a little painting in the top of the U.S. Capitol dome. If you sit on your back and you look up at the top of the Capitol, there's a painting up there, a fresco, called The Apotheosis of George Washington, in which he is positioned on a rainbow because they believe that he ascended after he was president of the United States and that he became a god, because they believe themselves to be gods where no one else is. And so what happens is they do not want us to know this, because if we knew that the pyramid could bring us to a godlike state, then we would start building them and we'd start using them, and they don't want us to have the technology. So they flaunt it right in front of you. They put it on the dollar bill. And they build the largest building in Washington, D.C. is what? The Washington Monument, which is what? It's a big obelisk. It's the same thing as the menhir, the standing stone, intended to ripple out energy into the surrounding city. You have a question? She asked, is it true that the world elite have different DNA? This is very interesting, and somebody asked me about our new whistleblower, Dr. Pete Peterson, and wanting me to share some of his testimony. And I said this on the radio with Project Camelot. I'll repeat it. There are some technologies that have been discovered that allow you to have a certain degree of influence over people's minds. Mind control. Okay? It's scary stuff. It is primarily something that can create blunt changes. It's not anything that can beam into your head and make you do very specific things. That's a misnomer. But it is possible to make a rough change to the way that people feel using certain types of energy based on these technologies. However, Dr. Peterson's research people found that fully 15% of all the people in the world cannot be affected by mind control. Ever. Ever. Now, we got this from the highest level of the Black Ops community. They cannot be affected at all. Ever. They developed a technology to make sure that if you're not part of that 15%, that you become part of that 15% who can never be affected by mind control. The technology is very simple, and they gave it to all the world leaders and all the Illuminati politicians. And they would hide it under their shirt lapel. See, I don't have one, because I'm not in there, all right? I'm just proving it right now. The technology is this little device that you put in your eye, and it has a little blinking light in it. And you turn a knob on the thing, and it makes the light blink faster and faster and faster, and you look at it. And what you're supposed to do is you keep looking at this device until the blinking frequency is so fast that you don't see the blink anymore, that you only see a clean light. Now what you want to do is get to the point that you can see it blinking faster and faster. That's the goal. You want to be able to see the blink and not have it turn into a solid light. Now, it's called a flicker frequency generator because what happens is it finds out the exact level. You turn it up just to the level where it becomes a solid color, where you no longer see blinking. And then there's a little weird circuit in there that's based on torsion fields. It's this funny little circuit, and it generates that frequency and it's beaming it into your body. It's a very, very simple circuit. There's nothing high technology about this, but what it does is it keeps your brain rate, it keeps your frequency of your brainwave activity up at the level where this frequency is flickering at a higher speed. Okay? Once your brainwave activity is up at that higher speed, you cannot be mind controlled at all. Now, any of us can reach that frequency. And the best way to reach it is, guess what? You knew what the answer was. Meditation. If you are in a positive, uplifting state of consciousness, if you are inspired and you're not negative and down but you have this positive outlook, your flicker frequency is too high to be affected by mind control. Now then the next question is, well, 15% of the people automatically don't have any susceptibility to mind control? And it turns out that yes, they do have a slightly different form of DNA than the rest of the planet. That's true. But it's not just people in the New World Order. And it's not just a master race. It's not just the white man. It's black people. It's Asian people. It's every race has part of this 15%. The thing that these guys in the government haven't discovered yet is that that little DNA marker that they found in the DNA is something that you switch on. You're not born with it. You switch it on by getting enlightened. Okay? That's why 15% of the people have it. It's the DNA marker that shows you that you have reached a level where your DNA has activated and where you no longer are susceptible to mind control. So if you are worried about this kind of stuff, if you are in fear, the answer to fear is love. Because fear is the absence of the energy of the universe. The energy of the universe will destroy poison, it will destroy disease, it will bring you bliss, it will bring you happiness, and it will bring you vitality to your physical body. It will raise your IQ, it will raise your vibration. It does these amazing, miraculous things. Well, here's the proof. Interplanetary climate change, which is NASA's hottest secret. Planets and the sun, and see changes just like we see on Earth. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that. This is a composite graph of solar activity based on core samples from the Antarctic and the Arctic. And what you're seeing is the total amount of sunspot activity. This is what it's been doing in the last few years. We are now at a point where the only time the solar activity was higher than it was right now just so conveniently happens to be 11,000 years ago, which in ancient teaching is associated with what? What happened 11,000 years ago? Atlantis fell, right? Could that be related to the solar activity? Hell yeah. So we're now at the strongest point in 8,000 years since that happened. Mercury has grown a magnetic field when MESSENGER went by in 2008 that was not seen in the 70s with Mariner 10. That's a big change in Mercury. Venus has had a 2,500% increase in this green glow on the night side that you can see there. That's active oxygen. So the atmosphere of Venus is changing back into something that's breathable. Mars is growing clouds and ozone, as you can see right here. There were no clouds on Mars before. That's brand new. The polar ice caps are melting on Mars, and they're actually calling it global warming in the mainstream media. But there's no SUVs on Mars, not that I've ever seen. Jupiter is having these white ovals that were disappearing between 97 and 2000, 3 of them, and then they all meld into one. And this scientist, Dr. Philip Marcus, believed it would cause Jupiter to warm by 18 degrees in only 10 years. Now, if that happened on Earth, what would happen to all life on Earth as we know it? Toast. It's toast. So there's a massive global warming going on with Jupiter. That was the prediction based on what would happen in 2000. That's about the time he did this prediction. He said 10 years. Look at what happens 8 years later. Jupiter is having raging thunderstorms and global upheaval. Towering storms more than 100 kilometers tall. The rare storms, a sign of recent turmoil on the planet. And here's the picture. These bright hotspots were never seen before. This is extra heat that shouldn't be there, and the colors of the rings are changing. Then you go out to Saturn, you're seeing this plasma torus that's grown. All this red area wasn't there before. That's all this charged energy coming from the sun. Jupiter also has one around it, which I just didn't have time to show you in this presentation because we had to shorten it. You're seeing massive X-rays coming out from near the equator of Saturn. That's also a new phenomenon. Again, you're seeing a hotspot, just like the one I just showed you on Jupiter, the raging storms, the global upheaval in 2008. Same thing happened in 2004. Where the heck did all this energy come from? The planet just goes, energy comes out. It's amazing. Uranus, as of 1986, looked like green pea soup with hardly any peas. Just the green part. Nothing to see. It's just very flat. Now, this is false color, so that's why this is brighter than this. We're not so much concerned about the color, we're concerned about these little guys, because that's what we didn't see before. These are huge storms. Now remember also, Voyager 2 swept by Uranus, so it saw the whole planet. It didn't just see the side that we see. So even with a satellite going past, we're now seeing all these storms that were not there before. And you're starting to see that happen. It was called featureless as a cue ball, but now Eric Karkoschka is saying, really big changes. Now this is more typical of NASA, when NASA says, ground-based observations show seasonal brightness changes, not well understood. Oh, moving on. They try to downplay this stuff. But this is interplanetary climate change. This is something that's happening to every planet. And all they do is they tell you that it's based on the tilt angle of the axis to the sun. The sun is heating it up because the pole is tilting or because the equator is tilting. And whatever the planet is doing, they just alter it for that planet and say, oh, well, it's got to be caused by the tilt angle of the planet relative to the center of the sun. Not so. Neptune, 1989, relatively few bright clouds. But between 96 and 2002, there's a 40% increase in brightness in the near-infrared range. This is very significant because, obviously, this could not be caused by anything we normally understand. And it's the same thing that's happening throughout the rest of the solar system. It's all doing the same stuff. What you're going to see now is a description, a visual description of how it's been changing. So check this out. You watch down here, you can start to see how it grows over just 6 years. So that's phenomenal. I mean, that's like turning on a lampshade and having light suddenly burst out of the planet that wasn't there before. The near-infrared range is not visible to the eye, but it's just above the visible level. So it's within the spectrum of what can be seen if you had the right eye to see it. So you can do that with a camera, you just can't do it with the naked eye. Now, Pluto is experiencing global warming even though it's moving away from the sun. There's been a 300% increase in its overall atmospheric pressure. This whole system tells us that Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. They're happening everywhere in the solar system. But even on Earth, we're seeing things that are not attributable to the ordinary climate change that we would think of as being caused by SUVs. Volcanic activity since 1875 has gone up by over 500%. Sea level is increasing. Temperature is increasing. Tornado activity is increasing. Natural disasters are increasing. The Inflation-adjusted economic losses are increasing. Here you see the red indicates how much heat there is at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, on the floor of the ocean. And then what you're seeing is 85 and 96, or 99 rather. So in 14 years, you see a substantial warming on the bottom of the ocean. Now guess how the scientists explain this? Well, of course, the sun is warming the top of the ocean. And then those warm particles just start sinking down, 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 which is what they're going to do, right? And they sink to the bottom, and they warm up the bottom of the ocean. That's got to be it. They warm up the bottom of the ocean, they sink down. So the next time you ever want to boil up some hot dogs, just get a hairdryer and it works great. Why wouldn't you do it that way? You'd probably take 3 hours to boil. It's ridiculous. Heat rises. That's the first, one of the most basic laws of thermodynamics that we all know. But not here. Something's happening inside the Earth. Well, just as we were talking about climate change in the solar system, we now have a change in this presentation. My microphone started malfunctioning at that point in the talk, and so what we've done is to move this shoot here to Joshua Tree, California, that the solar system would be changing in measurable ways, just as we're now seeing. But more importantly, these prophecies from the early 1950s clearly established that with these changes in the solar system, there would also be changes in human DNA that would literally correspond to an evolution of the human species as we now know it. This is the working nature of the prophecies of ascension, soul transmutation, and so forth that have been going on for so many thousands of years. We now actually have hard evidence from written prophecies that were published in books in the 1950s that you can go find on your own, showing us, in fact, that these climate changes that I've just described are nothing new. They were known about long ago, and it's all part of this spontaneous evolution that humanity is being led through at this time.